the fight today is not for equality. The fight is for fairness. Because if you're fighting for equality, the people who got all the advantages all the years are up here. You know, either have to take away the opportunities from them and give it to others, or you have to withhold the opportunities that they've been given in the past and give it to these people so they can move up. What we're fighting for is fairness. We're fighting for fairness so that we can actually work our way up to get that equality and level that playing field that we're dealing with. So I think there's a confusion to say that, you know, we're here to take, for example, when we hear people say, well, you want to come in the boardroom and you want to come in the C-suite, that means you want to take my job. No, we don't really want to take your job. We want to get a fair opportunity to get access to that. We want, when our business people go into a bank to get a loan, that they're assessed fairly to get that opportunity to create that business, to create wealth for themselves and for their community.
Michael, before you respond, I want to ratchet the question or fine tune the question. So again, I go back. When I work with the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, leaders like Reverend Dr. Steele Jr., their concern was the following, on just your point. When we marched and we faced the racist cops, and even in the streets of New Orleans and Baton Rouge, you felt it. We could use words like fairness and equality. Dr. Steele and other leaders, their concern was how we can translate opportunity, equality under the law. We can translate into law. How do we translate this intangible, as you put it so well, fairness, decency? There was that wonderful movie where Louis Gossett Jr. was playing a judge, and he's speaking to his own community, and he's saying, stop the riots, stop the violence, just be decent. You remember decency, it's what your grandmother taught you, except that people are forgetting decency. How can we really legislate decency and fairness? Or do we have to have laws that help to achieve quantifiable markers? And then at some point, say to our communities, whether Black or Jewish, and they've always been tied. One thing Michael left out of his presentation, and he normally finishes my thoughts, but just one fact, the only peoples in Western liberal societies that by law have been chattel, we're not talking about the Eastern Europe or, you know, the have been Blacks and Jews in Western liberal democracies, France and England and Canada and America. We were second-class citizens and in some cases, chattel. Do we not have a responsibility within all our communities to say, we can go this far, we can give you the protections of law, we fought for that, politicians need our votes, politicians need our money, but how do you change human nature? Is human nature, in other words, Wes, not changed because of the laws that set up quantifiable and achievable markers?
Well, it's kind of like you have tax laws, right? And the tax laws say you should do this and that, but all of a sudden people find loopholes in the law. Michael talked about the Jim Crow law. Slavery was abolished, but then the Jim Crow law came into effect that essentially gave you the same results as slavery. Why? Because the people that were prohibited from doing these things, they really didn't have a principled view of what they were prohibited from doing. They still wanted the old days. So when we look at the Black North Initiative, for example, what we have companies do to sign a pledge. And the pledge is a principle-based document to say, as a company, these are the things that we're gonna do on principle as the CEO of a business. So for example, I mentioned about Enbridge and the changes that they've made. Well, there's no law right now that indicated that they have to do those things, right? But yet, because of what's going on around them, they go, we need to change the conversation and we need to apply principle to our own company, to our own executive, to the way that we do business in order for us to change things. And the reason why we're using the business people to do that is because of the fact that politicians who have made the law, they tried to enforce the law, but the principle wasn't there, right? If a police officer is driving down the street, there's a law that says you can't target me because I'm Black. But that happens. But if there's no principle behind that, he's gonna stop me every single time. So that's
Michael,
what
I
we're
see
trying
you're
to
making,
tell.
sorry, Wes. I thought,
Yeah, go
I
ahead.
see Michael making notes. So, Michael, have in on this issue.
Oh, well, that's just the lawyer in me. I'm always taking
It's
notes,
perfect.
especially if you're talking, Beryl.
I don't know what you mean.
But yeah, listen, it's a really, really interesting question, and I definitely appreciate Wes's perspective on all of this. I mean, my own is that the law is neutral. Government is neutral. Our systems of justice, corporations are all neutral. At the end of the day, it's who's in control of those systems. And to your point, Beryl, it is really hard when you try to conceptualize, can we legislate morality as opposed to equity under the law, justice under the law, to make sure that our laws are just and that they are enforced equally for everybody. I mean, it's a very, very fair point that some people come into this world disadvantaged over others, and that can be because of the fact that laws were not equal, and and I think that's one discussion to be had. But at the same time, I mean, talking about police enforcement, B'nai B'rith put out in 2017 an 8-point plan to tackle anti-Semitism and hate crimes in Canada. We felt the need. This plan was actually endorsed by the Toronto Star, which doesn't always agree with all of the work that B'nai B'rith does, but it was endorsed because we noted, even in advance of what took place this past summer, that there was a need and a perception that the law isn't always equally enforced. And sometimes some groups view that as perhaps there's politics that's coming into play into this situation. We spoke about the need to have dedicated hate crimes units that have proper training, enhanced hate crime training, because we have wonderful police officers. They're already receiving great training, but if they don't have a personal experience into a certain community, they don't understand how that community works, and they don't get that enhanced training on how to deal with that community, well, mistakes are going to be made. Maybe charges are laid the wrong way or in an inconsistent way. Maybe charges are not laid because police feel that this is going to be causing problems between communities. At the end of the day, when I spoke about the Jewish-Black Alliance, it's because we at B'nai B'rith believe so strongly that creating these alliances within various sectors of Canadian society, getting different groups together in civil society, that's a big part of the solution here to move positively forward. We have to get groups at the civil society level working together, and then hopefully trust that our government and the laws that are enacted and the officials that are supposed to be enforcing those laws do so with complete equality under the law for everybody. And then I think by combining those two forces, hopefully we can get to a better society.
Gentlemen, question from Lila. I'll just use her first name. She asked, particularly in light of all the statistics, Wes, that you've presented, the history, Michael, that you've presented, Lila asks, how can we even use the word or the idea that our lawmakers could be neutral or making laws that make equality when the very laws are designed by many of the same people who sought to enforce the restrictions and the prejudices that brought them to office in the first place? And she goes on to say that clearly the statistics, Wes, that you showed demonstrate that these structures, these biases are so systemic or institutionalized and biased against women and Blacks and Indigenous Canadians, that can we really hope to use, as she puts it, the assumption of neutrality by our lawmakers with any degree of good faith and confidence?
Well, the information that I put forward, these were actually government statistics, and you should see the number of government reports that indicate that the way that Blacks and Indigenous people are treated in this country are very, very bad. Like they've indicated that, right? And these are government reports that were presented. The reason why we're using our business, the business people through the Black North Initiative, is so that wherever business goes, government follows and law follows. If the business people stand up and say this is unacceptable and it must change, it will change. I do agree. I showed a chart of the decision makers in this country. They all look the same. they're all just one race represented at the very top. But yet these are the people who are putting laws in place supposedly to protect me. And as I indicated, that there are some of those rules that they put in place, they're actually against me. Even though they say that it's supposed to protect me, it's against me. One of those is that, well, you're not allowed to collect race-based, put race-based information out there. Because when you hire an employee, you can't ask them what race that they are. Well, that discriminates against me, because at the end of the day, nobody can know whether or not I'm a part of the system or not a part of the system, because I'm not allowed to say. Whereas if you look at the UK and the US, they actually provide that information and collect that information so that they can actually address the issue. So what we're saying is—
went through that fight in Montreal with the police, where we were actually asking for that and they were fighting us on it.
They said no. And, so what we're saying is that, no, you cannot be at the table that excludes folks of a certain race or nationalities, and they're not at the table when laws have been made to supposedly protect them, right? They have to be a part of the conversation. So this whole fight that we're all having right now is that we must be a part of the conversation. I admire the Jewish community. And by the way, as Michael pointed out, quite clearly, our biggest allies are the Jewish community. That's the biggest ally that we have as a Black community. The Black Notice Initiative, the biggest donation that we have was from the Schulich Foundation for $1 million, right? And it's just, there's no question that that's where it is, because of the fact that the Jewish community understands what we're going through, because they've been there, right? And they're able to kind of help us in terms of the struggle to deal with a lot of the issues that we're dealing with today. So when we look at some of the laws, for example, the Jewish community was very strong in pushing for these changes that we see in the law. And we're hoping that we can use that alliance, teaming up with the indigenous people, teaming up with the Jewish community to really overall, overhaul the structure that we have today to make it better. And we will make it happen, but we have to do it collectively for us to make it happen.
Michael, let me ask you for your comments on another angle on this same question, and throw in, since Wes just mentioned Indigenous Canadians, a question from an anonymous, and TD wants to stay anonymous. First, can we really afford to consider or assume good faith or bon foi among our lawmakers and among our establishment leaders? And secondly, what can the problems of Indigenous Canadians, who have such a sad history, but yet an interlocking relationship with the government, can they be addressed in the same way as anti-Black racism and anti-Semitism, where the other communities, our communities, Blacks, Jews, are outsiders to the government system, whereas Indigenous Canadians find themselves both racially put upon, discriminated against, and yet are in this internecine relationship with government in terms of money and funding their communities. So first, on the good faith question, I know you're an optimist and I'm not, but that's okay.
Yeah, listen, I am an optimist, and I do, I always err on the side of trusting that people are of good faith, and I think that there's always bad apples. There's going to be a bad apple in any school, any workplace, and any government and any police force. That always happens. But I think the vast majority of people that are up there are trying to do the right thing, are trying to be there, and usually are there for the right reasons. However, to Wes's point, if you're missing views, if there's no Black people around the table, if there's no women around the table, are they going to be missing a certain perspective when they're pushing forward and maybe sometimes bringing in their own biases, which they may not be conscious of when they're pushing forward in a particular direction? And we see historical shifts when all of a sudden segments of society rise up and say, hey, you know what? This is not fair. We need to see this change. And sometimes governments don't want to make those changes, but those changes have to come when enough of us in the population stand together and demand that change. And that's one of the wonderful things about Canada and Western society, that it is a democracy. We have the right to vote, and we have the ability to change. People are there for temporary periods of times. Thank God we don't have dictators right now, which are, we can't kick out and tell us what to do. So we need to ensure, fair reporting and journalism is very important, but also, this freedom under society. But it is important, by the way, though, to trust that there is good faith, because if we don't trust that there's good faith, then, we're talking about chaos. And if we're talking about chaos, that's not good for anybody. And I can say, Beryl knows this too from historical experience, particularly within the Jewish community. Very, very bad things happen to a lot of people. So we want stability. We want to have, like as Wes mentioned, and I think the concept is sound and makes a lot of sense. Get business going forward, driving government, because they will follow in the right direction. And in terms of Indigenous, though, just very briefly, it is different. It is unique because of the history of the situation, because of the laws and the Indiana Act and everything. There's no question that there's a different way to go about it. But yet, we still have to have hope that there is a pathway forward. But sometimes we also have to recognize when something's not working, and we have to think about doing something in a different way to improve the situation.
The problem is that we can't change what we don't acknowledge, right? We hear politicians time and time again say that there is no systemic discrimination in Canada. We saw that in the video that we opened with. And we can't say that. The fact of the matter is that we cannot sit here and say people aren't treated differently. In particular, Blacks and Indigenous people aren't treated differently. I can't hide the fact that I'm a Black man. I can't walk into a room and disguise the fact that I'm Black. Everybody sees me and knows me. So if all of a sudden discrimination is right there, and the same with the Indigenous people as well. So, we look, for example, Canada, and I, just one correction, Michael, regarding slavery, history is not taught. Black history and Indigenous history aren't taught in schools in this country. And that's one of the problems that we have, right? Slavery was abolished in 1834 in this country, right? So we had slaves in the house that I lived in Rosedale. The patriarch of this family had 7 slaves, right? And we saw ads in the newspaper in Halifax that says, we're looking for a Negro, and we're selling a Negro. And the reason why the Underground Railroad came to Canada is because of the fact that slavery was abolished earlier than in the US, 1834 here and 1865 in the US. And there's this time period whereby we're taking people in because people were fleeing because we didn't have it here. But we don't acknowledge those things, right? We don't acknowledge those things. The beauty about the Jewish community is that there is great cultural facility that Jewish community have that talks about the slavery and remind people of what the Jewish community went through historically. And those places are all over the world, not only just to educate Jewish people, but to educate other people as to what happened and why it will never and should never happen again. We unfortunately don't have those places, as in the Black community, also in the Indigenous community. And the hope is, with allies, that we can create those places whereby we can learn about our culture and the contribution that we've made to this great country, as opposed to just the bad things that have happened to us and that we're looking for handouts, right? We look at some of the amazing things that Black people and Indigenous people have done to Canada, but it's not highlighted anywhere, right? It's not in textbooks, it's not taught in schools, it's nowhere. So all of a sudden, it looks like we're a bunch of freeloaders, because the prison population, there's a lot of us in there. There's a lot of us in bad neighborhoods. Every time there's something wrong, our pictures are there. And but they don't talk about the good things that we've done. And that's why, as a community, we need to change that, and we will change that, but we need allies to make that happen.
Yeah. Gentlemen, thank you for, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, just with a Montreal connection, because I agree, and I think that's fantastic, Wes, and that just to your point, Montreal now has a hate crimes unit in its police force, but for the longest time, didn't. It's actually B'nai B'rith that was instrumental in getting them to do it. And for the longest time, they said, there's no hate crimes in Montreal. How do we know? Because there's no police force investigating it. Nothing's coming to our attention. So therefore, it doesn't exist. So just to your point.
Just to finish on a common point, and yes, Michael's right, and they did great work, and we've got a hate crimes unit, but it is more honored in the breach than in the reality. And on your note, Wes, about names, and it is easier for Jews today. We are white. People can't sometimes tell us, but I'll tell you about the name thing. So we're still going through, and I'm involved in all these cases. First of all, try growing up with a name like Wajsman, spelled the way I spelled it. That's number one. But we have a rash of cases, even though we have laws against it, where police officers are stopping Black men in parking lots 6 cases, I mean, every couple of months. Mais, vos papiers, s'il vous plaît, your papers, please. Mais Joel Denis Robitaille, c'est pas un nom francophone. This was, in this, the Robitaille case, this man was stopped 3 times because he was driving a very expensive car. He was rather young, properly dressed, but the police officer saw his identification and felt it was too Quebecois. It was too much of Quebecer. And what are you doing in this big car? And, you know, with the human rights leads here, I fought the police, like it's every 2 months. It's like getting an invitation for dinner. Gentlemen, you're terrific. Your work is great. Wes, I have to get you together with Alain Babineau of CRAR in Montreal.
Happy to.
And a banker at BMO named Ken Mangachi. And I want to end with a paraphrase of a comment of Dr. Martin Luther King's in his I Have a Dream speech that goes too unnoticed. And he said, America has been writing checks on its Bank of Moral Credit to its Black citizens, and they always come back NSF. Sadly, the world always seems to be writing checks on its Bank of Moral Credit to beautiful words, and it always comes back NSF. Thank you, gentlemen, very much.
Beryl, Michael, thank you guys so much.
Thank you both.
Appreciate sharing the stage with you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Excellent.
One of the most damaging effects of systemic racism is that it creates conditions under which a person has little or no access to justice to fight back. In a country where every person is supposed to have the same ability to use the same tools to stand up for their rights, too many people in Canada are coming up against a justice system that has significant barriers. Pensez à ceci. Si une personne éprouve déjà des difficultés, luttant afin d'avoir de la nourriture sur la table, luttant afin de remédier à des conditions de logement qui sont inadéquates, luttant pour accéder à des opportunités d'emploi, il est fort probable que cette personne vivant dans des conditions de cette nature ne puisse faire valoir ses droits, n'ait pas accès à la justice, ne puisse utiliser les outils qui sont à la disposition de l'autre partie. Un des plus grands angles morts du Canada est l'impact du racisme systémique sur l'accès à la justice. Sans l'accès à la justice, les iniquités qui existent déjà sont exacerbées et vous ne pouvez pas lutter pour protéger vos droits. L'accès à la justice, c'est un enjeu des droits de la personne, c'est un enjeu qui est démocratique, c'est un enjeu économique, c'est un enjeu social. L'accès à la justice est un des droits les plus importants qui soit. But the barriers don't stop at just the individual level. For years, our justice system have been riddled with systemic racism. Part of the problem is that in order to dismantle systemic racism in our justice system, we must recognize the critical lack of representation in our legal system. Study after study has confirmed that racialized lawyers still have to overcome significant barriers to advance their legal careers. Our country's legal decisions can only be as robust and meaningful as the perspectives and lived experience arguing for them. The same is true for those in decision-making roles. Former Chief Justice Beverly McLaughlin once said that Canadians should be able to see themselves reflected in the judges who are on the bench. She said it is important to have as diverse a bench as possible so we can have different perspectives represented. Yet today, our current Supreme Court of Canada comprises only white judges. Add to this the realities of over-policing of Indigenous, Black, and racialized people, and the disproportionately high numbers of Indigenous, Black, and racialized people in our prisons. And it all amounts to a sobering reality that for Indigenous peoples, Black Canadians, and other racialized persons, the entire justice system is one big barrier. from interactions with police on the street, to the court system, to our sentencing processes, to the overpopulation in our prison system, and to in-prison issues such as solitary confinement. The whole system needs overhauling, even if one section at a time. We are seeing some promising action and awareness on this. But this, I know for sure, we do not need more studies on these issues. It's being studied. Now it's time for concrete action. And it is on that idea that I will conclude my remark today. The kinds of actions that we as individuals can take to help dismantle racism in our country. I believe one of the first steps goes back to my main theme today, recognizing and confronting the truth about racism in Canada. We cannot accept denial on this issue any longer. Not from our leaders, not from our colleagues, not from our neighborhoods, friends, and family. Racial biases and systemic racism may be difficult truths for some people to recognize or accept in their country, and especially in themselves. Some unconscious biases run so deep, they go undetected, unexamined for years. That is why at the Commission, we have been working with our staff and our entire team to ensure an organization-wide understanding of where our biases come from and how to be more aware of them and how to challenge them, how to ask difficult questions. It is part of a larger effort we have undertaken in recent years to take a closer look on how racism, even if unintentionally, may impact our processes, our decisions, and the way we serve people in Canada. We are looking at tangible ways the Commission can improve access to justice for those filing race-based discrimination complaints with us. We are actively listening to racialized members of our staff to hear directly from them about their lived experience with barriers to equality and opportunities. We are reaching out to our stakeholders and outside experts for their views on how the Commission can improve. And we are ensuring that all this knowledge informs meaningful and sustainable action. In closing, there is an old saying that is usually heard around election period, like the one we have just witnessed south of our border. All politics is local. It is about how most of us are best motivated by positive changes happening right where we live. To put in another way, Eleanor Roosevelt famously said during the 1948 signing of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that human rights begin in small places, close to home, so close and so small that they cannot be seen on any maps of the world. So it begins in our own backyards, in our own workplaces, in our children's school, and in conversations around the family table. And conversation like